I'm Julie Zenner along with Dennis Anderson, and here's what's coming up on Almanac North.
2 deaths in the Native American community this past week pitted local tribal members against the county medical examiner. We'll talk about American Indian beliefs and the issue of autopsies.
An upcoming FCC ruling could have a major impact on how consumers and businesses access broadband internet services.
And we'll have the week's business headlines and a news file story from 25 years ago.
These stories and more coming up next on Almanac North. Hello and welcome to Almanac North. Thanks for watching. Denny, real winter seems to have returned this week.
I just saw the forecast. For the next 7 nights, we're going to have below zero weather.
Ooh,
but it is winter.
Turn on the electric blanket.
I think so.
All right, our first topic received a lot of attention this week, so let's get to it.
All right, thank you very much, Julie, and welcome, everyone. The separate deaths of 2 Native Americans in car accidents this week resulted in some tense moments. The local county medical examiner insisted in doing autopsies on the deceased, despite protests from family and tribal members. Although the bodies were eventually returned to the families without autopsies, the incidents point out a lack of understanding of cultural and religious beliefs. Joining us now is Tad Johnson, Director of the Graduate Studies Program at UMD's American Indian Studies Department. And Rebecca St. George is the staff attorney with the Fond du Lac Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa. Thank you both for being here tonight. Kind of a delicate issue, really. These cases indicate that Minnesota law, Tad, doesn't do enough to address really the religious and the cultural aspects of Native Americans. Is it time to change the law?
I think so. The law in Minnesota does not take into account certain religions. In the Native American world, particularly in the Ojibwe world or Anishinaabe world, there's the Medewin. And in the Medewin world, there is they do not believe in autopsies. There's certain rituals that are done shortly after someone passes or walks on, as they say. The first night they're supposed to be bathed in cedar, and there's 4 nights of mourning, and then on the 5th day there's the burial. And this is a topic that's not terribly discussed. For a long time, the United States government was trying to assimilate Indians into the mainstream of the population, and so they sent a lot of folks to boarding schools. They were forbidden from practicing their religion, so they did a lot of things underground, which is why a lot of folks are not familiar with these practices.
So what happened here? The county medical examiner insisted on autopsies, and you sought out a judge.
Yes, the first person who passed was Mishkoob Abed, and Mishkoob was a traditional drum keeper, a member of the Mille Lacs Band, lived in the East Lake area, and in the McGregor area, they're particularly steeped in the Medewin culture. And when Mishkoob passed, and he was a 4th degree Medey, and he did not believe in autopsies. There's a number of things they don't believe in, and he believed in this journey that occurs after death. He had a car accident on Friday night. He died in the Cloquet Hospital on Saturday. And then the State Patrol basically said they didn't think he needed an autopsy. The medical examiner decided that he did. They brought the body to Duluth to be autopsied. The family followed the body in, and that's where there were protests and they were very quiet and respectful, but they. Under the traditions, they build a fire, they have a feast, they eat some food, that type of thing. In the meantime, Rebecca and I had gone to a judge, gotten a court order for the body to be released, and we got it about 11 o'clock on Sunday night. But the medical examiner had not heard of the Medewin, did not know about these traditions, and it wasn't until the following morning when we met with the St. Louis County attorney who sort of acted as a mediator between Carleton County attorney and the medical examiner. That finally, the body was released, and then the second occurrence happened, and something very similar occurred. But it was really a clash of cultures, and it was really a misunderstanding of this type of religion. And there are a number of religions that do not believe in autopsies. Orthodox Jewish folks don't have autopsies. The Hmong community does not believe in autopsies. There are a number of other religions, and the law in Minnesota doesn't contemplate it, and that's what we think needs to be changed.
Mm-hmm. Rebecca, is there a large number of American Indians in this area that actually follow these cultural traditions?
I guess that's a relative question. Yes, and it's not all. We have an awful lot of Christian American Indians, non-religious, but like Tad said, in a way it's hard to quantify because of how many people are underground and don't talk about it and are very careful about how much you can say, right? We won't necessarily say, you know, this is exactly what we do because it was illegal to do it all really up until the 1970s.
So what's going to happen now? Is the Native American community and the county or the state going to try to get together and mediate before this should happen again?
Yes. And I've actually heard from tribal attorneys from around the country saying, what's the legal research you're doing? What's the process you're doing? Because we want to make sure this doesn't happen in our communities, because there are certainly other tribal communities that have the same beliefs. But we have already started meeting with people from St. Louis County. We have meetings set up with people from Carleton County, and we are working on figuring out what we can do next and how we can make sure that this doesn't happen. And there's some creative ideas coming out of it, such as, you know, during Mr. Abed's, while things were happening at UMD, one of the requests for his family was just to be able to go in and be with his body so they could bathe him.
Sure.
Right, and that wasn't possible, and part of that was that they felt like they didn't have the space for that, and so maybe we could create that space. So there's things like that that we could do.
What do you say to those who argue that autopsies after car accidents are just standard procedure and are necessary in order to kind of keep those medical records accurate?
I think we would take our guidance from the New York law, for example, where there's a number of Orthodox Jewish people. There are times that are covered under that law where there are autopsies that are needed, whether it's a homicide or there's some foul play suspected, or there's a whole list of reasons when autopsies are required. But there's also, if there's somebody who has a religious objection or a cultural belief that autopsies are not part of their faith, under the New York law, they are allowed to not have the autopsy and just go straight to the burial. And that's probably most cases. But there are some exceptions under that law, and they're practical, common sense exceptions, and I think anybody would agree to them if there was some suspicion of some crime being committed or other reasons, infectious diseases or other types of reasons. But we think that the law could be changed to reflect that. If there is this sincere religious belief and a cultural tradition that autopsies are not performed, we think the law should be changed so that people can be allowed to mourn. And one important group here are the people mourning. So the family was not allowed to mourn in their traditional way. Now, Mashkoob, actually 25 years ago, Mashkoob and his brother had to take their father's body was taken by a coroner at that time, and ironically, they took the body. The county sheriff chased after them. I don't think they ever caught them. They buried their father the traditional way. That made it all the way to the Washington Post, and you'd think by now we'd have changed the law. But here we are 25 years later. Mashkoob now passed away, and it's probably time to change it. And the other thing we need to do is cultural education. There's a lot of misunderstandings about Native American culture. Governor Dayton has been very good on this issue. He signed an order that if there are matters going on involving Indian tribes, Indian reservations, there's got to be consultation with the Indian tribe. But there also has to be education for people that are working regularly with Indian tribes. And that's for state employees, and that also has to trickle down to the county level. Because we think if the medical examiner had a little more education, a little more information about Medewin and other practices of Native American people, this incident could have been avoided.
Rebecca, it sounds like these are delicate issues because of the mourning process that's involved when a family loses a loved one. How do you think that you, as an Indian community, can kind of sit down with officials? What's going to happen next? Are you going to try to start that conversation?
Absolutely. It's something that needs to come, obviously from both sides. We have to have a conversation, but there's going to have to be a lot of healing. A lot of hurt happened over this past week in our communities. A lot of anger and hurt that's going to have to be worked through before we can have an open conversation. We can look at the law, and really any law, you say what law needs to change. We still have the reality that there's the difference between what's necessary for public safety, right? Absolutely necessary. What do we have to do for public safety versus what do we have to do to make sure we have good statistics, and what's a good idea. And our religious freedoms really are basic. Both in the federal constitution and the state constitution, it's absolutely basic. So to say we need to do these things because it's a good idea in the face of someone's really profound religious beliefs is pretty damaging.
It almost sounds like you believe common sense has to play a role.
Well, sometimes. Yes, I think that's a huge one. And respect. There has to be respect. And there has to be respect of our communities, of our Indian communities, and of our knowledge, what we have and what we bring. There has to be an understanding that it's real.
Ted, you mentioned that that religion is something that a lot of the Native peoples don't really talk about out of fear. Having a couple of high-profile cases like this in the media, do you think that's going to change things and more people will be willing to come forward and say this is what I believe and assert their rights?
I think in order for the discussion to go forward, and we have been talking already to the county sheriff, the county attorneys in Carlton and St. Louis County. The governor weighed in. We've been talking to the United Council of Churches, some Orthodox Jewish organizations, and I think a dialogue needs to begin. And we're hoping that there can be a coalition put together from both sides of the aisle, and that legislation can be introduced to try to remedy this situation. It's got to be legislation, and it's got to be cultural education going hand in hand. So we're going to have to talk to each other to remedy this.
And you came out of the classroom to take on this case. Are you going to be getting out of the classroom to lobby for the continuation of this going forward?
This was kind of a one-time thing. I got a call from a spiritual leader, a tribal spiritual leader on Sunday morning. He said, "You've got to stop this autopsy." And so I called Rebecca, who's a much better lawyer than I am.
Well, Rebecca, who would never say no to Tad Johnson.
Rebecca St. George and Tad Johnson, thank you both very much for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Now, let's dig into our news file archive for a look at what was making news 25 years ago this week.
This sound is making history in Minnesota. Until now, commercial drilling took place only on land. Tapping the state's underwater frontier could be seen as progress, but these environmentalists don't see it that way at all.
I live on an island, and this is why we're here, and these people want to come up and pollute our water as they have in the Rockies and Colorado and wherever, and we're just not going to allow that.
But BHP Utah, the company which began exploratory drilling today on Ely's Shagwa Lake, says water contamination is not an issue.
We've gone to extraordinary measures to make sure that this is safe. We won't impact the lake. We're not adding anything to the lake. We're not using anything toxic or poisonous or anything, and all we're pulling out of the lake is rock.
This drilling is exploratory. If gold is found in the rocks below, a mine will be built here, a mine which would employ up to 100 people. But along with the new jobs comes a greater risk.
As far as environmental risk, sure, if you put a mine in, it's more of a risk than exploration, and I wouldn't disagree with that, but it can be done very safely.
Not safely enough, though, according to the people who live on and around this lake. For them, any risk is too much for a resource they consider priceless. In Ely, Colleen Burns, KDLH News.
The Federal Communications Commission is about to issue a rule that could change the playing field for consumers and businesses that purchase broadband internet services. But ask the average person what net neutrality means, and you'll probably receive a blank stare. In truth, net neutrality is one of the most important long-term issues facing American competitiveness. So this week, we call on an expert to help explain what it is and why we should all care about the FCC rule. And joining us is Chris Swanson, CEO of PureDriven, a Two Harbors firm that specializes in online marketing and web services for businesses. And welcome, Chris.
Thank you.
And you're going to have to bring it down to my level here,
Okay.
Because I'm one of those that kind of glazes over. You know, net neutrality. What is it?
It can be a fairly complicated thing to discuss, so we'll try to keep it as simple as possible. What's happened in the past is some of the larger ISPs, internet service providers, you name some of them, Charter, maybe Mediacom, have done some things in the past where they've actually done what's called traffic shaping. And what that is they basically have set it up so that if you're a consumer using that internet connection, maybe you're using a tool like Skype, which is a very popular tool, they're able to actually make it so that that traffic has less priority on the internet. And that can have a big impact because if you're using video, for example, and it's a slower connection for video versus other services, it can cause problems with that connection. It can be a poor connection.
So my internet service provider knows when I'm using Skype?
Yes, on the internet, any packet that goes through the internet, really, they could tell if they wanted to, and they know what your packet is and what you're using. Yeah.
So, Chris, consumers might be asking, why should the FCC be involved in the internet at all?
Well, the FCC's kind of been involved in the internet for a long time because it started with telecommunications, and the internet has evolved out of a telecommunications structure. But there's a lot of people that are arguing that they shouldn't be involved. And the reason is that the internet's been a wonderful economic boom for the United States of America and all across the world. And so there's a lot that argue don't touch what's not broken.
Mm-hmm. So there's fear maybe of over-control?
Definitely fear of over-control. Fear that they're going to stop or they're not going to allow for the financial tiers that some of the service providers want to create, where you could pay more for higher quality or faster internet connection.
Could this also mean additional taxes, additional fees if you use the internet?
Well, that's one of the arguments, is as soon as the FCC steps in and starts making changes to the laws, the slippery slope argument of what's going to happen
as
next.
we saw with the
Right.
telephone. I mean,
Exactly.
Look at all the taxes and fees
Right,
on the phone
and
bill.
you can look at your phone bill today if you can decipher that phone bill, and you do see that federal tax, and it's a significant portion of the bill.
Talk a little bit about the proposed changes in the rules and who would be the winners and who would be the losers in this?
Sure, and I definitely have my opinion on that,
Sure.
but others may have a different opinion. The proposed rules, really, the FCC is saying we don't want these ISPs to be able to shape the packet or shape the internet as it's come from your home or from a business. And so we're going to create laws that tell these ISPs they can't do that. Well, if you look at the history of any sort of technology that's been regulated, usually what happens is a small local ISP or a small local business gets impacted more by those laws than, say, a larger ISP would. And the reason is that if you have lots of attorneys and you have money and you know how to study those laws, you can usually find loopholes in those rules. But if you're a small ISP, you're definitely going to have problems. You're not going to be able to get through all that legal jargon.
So with more laws possibly on the table, Do you see millions of internet subscribers bailing out and say, I don't want this anymore?
No, I don't
That's not
see that
gonna
happen.
happen.
The internet's too ingrained in every single thing that we do. But what is going to impact, Dennis, I think very significantly is potentially the connection to a home, especially in a rural area. Because if you start creating structures of tiered service, or you say you can't have structure to tier service, the infrastructure potential, it won't be as high quality. For example, you might not get a fiber optic connection into a rural area if that's the case. And that can have a big impact on maybe a rural area.
Would that just be because regulating the industry would prevent people from wanting to invest in that infrastructure, or what?
Yeah, my argument would be that it would be a smaller ISP no longer can keep up. And as soon as that smaller ISP exits the marketplace, the larger ISP has got an unfair advantage. So in trying to fix something with the FCC rules, they may actually create a larger problem for those local smaller ISPs who are competing effectively and keeping the prices down.
So you see this potentially driving some smaller ISPs out of business and reducing the number of choices that people have potentially.
Well, absolutely. If you start looking at some of the wireless services that we have today, 15 years ago there was many wireless service providers for cellular wireless, your mobile phones and things like that. Now you see that a lot of those companies have combined. And a lot of that came from the regulatory structure, the what they call the wireless spectrum, that you now have to bid on, and you potentially spend billions of dollars on that spectrum. And small ISPs can't handle that.
Chris, I want to read a quote real quickly that we got from Charter Communications regarding this, and we're going to put this up on the screen. Charter Communications supports an open internet, they say, which is vital for consumers and central to continued success. Now, it's not their complete statement here, but I am saying that Charter Communications told us in part, quote, applying 1930s era rotary telephone legislation to a 21st century computer technology comes with significant risks to consumers. It's a solution in search of a problem and threatens to undermine continued investment to improve and expand our nation's broadband infrastructure. That's from Kimberly Netzel, Senior Manager of Communications of Charter Communications. So my next question to you, Chris, is this a solution in search of a problem?
I think so, to some extent, yes. I'll just say this, I think the internet has worked very well. Let's not try to fix something that's not broken today.
Are there abuses, though, that are taking place within the marketplace that you can see the need for something like this perhaps down the line, if not now?
Right. I think there's other ways to solve that, Julie. I think there's maybe opportunity for some incentives, or maybe let the market play out a little bit, create a more competitive environment for smaller ISPs to enter the marketplace easier or easily. And I think that would be maybe a much better way to approach this problem versus regulation.
Could it also limit the type of information that people get over their internet, or is that outside the scope of this?
Well, it could to some extent. If it went down that direction in terms of, say an ISP decided they wanted to start or started doing things to the internet that you're using. But there was a ruling in 2010. FCC went to the Supreme Court with it, and it basically said that you can't really shape the packets. So there's already been some precedents here where ISPs were doing that, where they were basically slowing down certain services you'd use on the internet, and the FCC won in that scenario. So it's an interesting thing.
As years and decades go on, do you see further tweaking in the future?
Well, I think so. Yeah, I mean, I think they are going to keep watching it. Keep in mind, we're in the infancy still of the internet.
I would think so.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Where do you see it being 10 years from now?
I hope that we have lots of competition in each marketplace, whether it's rural or urban environments. And I hope that the internet connectivity in terms of physical infrastructure allows for us to be competitive on a worldwide scale in terms of speed and quality of service.
And we're still not there yet in this area?
Not really. Interestingly enough, no, we're not there.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming in and very ably telling us in
Thanks, Chris.
I tried.
easy
Thank you.
terms
Appreciate
how-
it very much.
what this
Yeah.
is all about. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's time now for the week's top business stories from Business North. The University of Wisconsin-Superior could lose $4.6 million in two-year funding as a result of cuts in Governor Scott Walker's budget. In total, Walker wants to trim $300 million from UW system-wide spending, system-wide spending during the 2015-2016 term. State Senator Jan Bewley, State Representative Nick Milroy, and UWS Chancellor Renee Wachter will host a public meeting on Monday at Yellow Jacket Union to address the future of higher education in northwestern Wisconsin.
The excavation and thermal treatment of polluted soils at the Ashland Lakefront project is nearly complete. Xcel Energy owns a portion of the property along with the city of Ashland. Xcel says work at the Superfund site took 10 months and included more than 150 people. There will be ongoing treatment of groundwater in the project area, which will cost $24 million. In total, crews excavated and thermally treated 70,000 tons of impacted soil and hauled away more than 17,000 tons of material to a licensed landfill.
Yvonne Predner-Solon has been appointed to the Duluth Seaway Port Authority Board. She replaces Cal Larson, who served from 2003 to 2014. Predner-Solon was appointed by Governor Mark Dayton after serving as his lieutenant governor during his first term. Before that, she served as a Minnesota State Senator and Duluth City Councilor. Predner-Solon recently said she is considering a bid for Duluth mayor, but has not yet announced her decision. For more on these and other stories, visit businessnorth.com.
If you have a comment on our show, now is the time to call. Dial 218-788-2849 to leave a message or send an email to almanacnorth@wdse.org. And look to the WDSE website for the latest program information, for updates on your favorite local shows and news and events here at the station. And Denny, it looks like a cold weekend ahead, so take precautions with any outdoor activities and maybe snuggle up with Judy for Valentine's Day.
Oh, Valentine's Day.
Valentine's Day is tomorrow.
Wow, isn't that
Yeah.
something? 14th, huh? All right.
Don't forget. For Denny and the crew here at Almanac North, I'm Julie Zenner. Have a great weekend, everyone.